Thanks for everybody. Thanks for the panel who's joined us this morning to talk about Reinventing Brand Australia. Of Victoria University is here. He's probably the personal author of one of the best new campaigns I've seen in years in student recruitment. Helen Bartlett from the University of the Sunshine Coast has unfortunately had a Sunshine Coast issue and is not with us today. But Z. Upton from the University of Newcastle is. She's DBC Research and Innovation. Joanne Wright from the University of Sydney also had a bail. But Tim Payne, the Higher Education Director, Policy Director of the University, has very kindly stepped into the breach. Thank you all very much for being here. Can I ask, we all assume that universities have lost social licence, have they? Or indeed, what is social licence? Adam.
Sorry to just grab. So go. Hello, colleagues. And just paying tribute to Indigenous peoples as I was walking over here. So much in this area, and NFSA is very much First Nations territory and records. So just thought it was really worth mentioning as something which we deeply believe in and do every day. And that's sort of a bit of an answer to part of your question, that in some areas there's been some advance, and I think in that area we see much more leadership than there was, let's say, 10 years ago, in First Nations leadership in universities and so forth, and some really incredible changes being made. But overall, I don't think we're in a good place, to be honest, at the moment. And it's not any individual's non-doing or doing as such, but the world has become, it's almost like this, I guess 50 years ago or so, maybe universities were not thought of as much in a sense unless you're in them, and it was a bit like that's there, force field around it unless you're actually in them. But as we've become so much more present in every capital city, in every regional city, in every place in the country, the expectations have gone up too. So I think there is an expectation that we have to reach, and we're not there yet. So the answer is we don't have it all, by no means.
Okay. Z. Upton, your university has got a great regional presence. I mean, it is a university by the hunter for the hunter. And it's always done that. Does this generalised issue apply if someone can build their brand on a geographic area?
Well, thank you for acknowledging that. We are definitely a university of and for our regions, and our region has a very big footprint of the hunter area, which of course has got a burning platform in that we need to transition to new industries. And so the role of the university in assisting that is absolutely critical. And the university has done that before in helping the transition when BHP shut down. So it's got a history of doing it. Its capability to do it is being challenged because unlike a urban university, it doesn't have a lot of international students. In fact, it's about 1,200 to 1,500. So we don't actually have those resources to do what's needed. But we do work with our community all the time, and we have very well branded activities. So, for example, NEAR, which is the Newcastle Institute for Energy and Resources, there's nothing like it anywhere else in Australia. We have lots of huge big sheds and workshops. We do prototyping. We do assist our industries by coming in so they can get the next scale up in their manufacturing. And so that's a brilliant example of how important we are. The second one is the Hunter Medical Research Institute, HMRI. Again, the partners are the local health district, the university and the community. 3 tripartite partners. And again, enormous branding and really focused on how do we deliver better healthcare in place across a huge footprint where there's 1 million people in rural, remote, regional and peri-urban areas. And so, yeah, we do a good job. We want to do better. And it's very, very difficult in the current funding situation.
But you also have one of the largest low SES components in the country. And like the used market, as I understand it, you're pitching in a lot of ways specifically to that. I saw a product briefing on your access campaign at Newcastle last year, and it was first rate. Yeah. It was just terrific.
Yeah. So we have, at the last graduation, 52% of our students were first in family, which I think is still phenomenal, and that's pretty consistent over a large number of years. We have the highest rate of Indigenous students throughout Australia, highest number of Indigenous staff. It should be a lot higher. And the other thing which we do is you have a lot of people coming in through that Pathways program. And so, in fact, again, when we're talking about the typical student, it's not people straight out of high school. 50% are actually adults, often mothers with children who they're caring for at the same time. And so they might not want that campus experience that we all longingly talk about. So there are very different issues at stake in the regions, and I think the regions have to have viable training opportunities, because that's where 35% of our GDP and the non-service GDP in particular, so where we're likely to have manufacturing moving forwards, is actually in the regions.
I want to come to Adam about that, about social licence, disadvantage, but first let me just throw to Tim. This is not an issue that you large... I mean, the Group of Eight will always tell us that they have a disproportionately large number of low SES students enrolled, but overall, your brand is not about first generation opportunity. Your brand is about rich and powerful and successful and elite and changing the world. Is it selling? Is it washing?
Yeah, well, can I just firstly start by apologising for Professor Joanne Wright, who was to be here. She really wanted to be here, but she had some problem with her flight, so I've been asked to step in. I also just wanted to thank Tim and Stephen so much for putting on the event.
Tim.
My plan was to be here to listen and to reflect and actually to connect with colleagues that care deeply about the sector. I don't want to sit here and talk about the University of Sydney, but I do want to thank Ant and Paul and other colleagues. I've got my team here. We've only got a small policy team at the University of Sydney, but we're here because the sector does have a social licence issue, and we wanted to listen, to learn about what people think about what needs to be done to fix it. That's what I'm hoping that we can get out of today, and to really have more discussion, the type of discussion that you don't get necessarily at the Universities Australia conference. But I'd just basically stop there. But I'd like us to talk about trust rather than the University of Sydney so much, or trust and the things that we can practically do, the stories we can tell, because it's not cutting through, even though we know there is a great value. And I also think maybe it'd be interesting to know how many of us in the room are from universities, because I think we just sort of talk in echo chambers. We're talking to ourselves, but really the problem is that we're not talking enough to the broader community. So how do we actually get these types of discussions to talk to the people whose opinions really matter, and stop talking about ourselves? Talk about students, talk about people with healthcare problems. And I think we've just too much as a sector talk about ourselves, and we fight between ourselves.
Then let me ask you the question that flows from that. Why aren't we talking about those issues?
Why aren't we?
Why aren't we doing it enough? Or why aren't people hearing us doing it? Hearing you doing it, sorry.
Well, actually, I think we really need to unpack it, because right at the moment, Universities Australia has a very expensive advertising campaign that's titled Universities Matter, and there's all sorts of great stories, but what's the cut through from that? How are we telling our stories at the local level? University of Sydney has a big footprint across the whole of New South Wales. We've got Broken Hill and Dubbo and Lismore, but actually when you talk within the university and university leadership, it's quite often that we forget the footprint of that institution and the way it's contributing, and the amazing things that students, and in those sites, they're not just students from the University of Sydney, they're students from all across that are doing their rural placements in the regional areas, coming together. But often I feel that there's too much competition between universities for attention or resources, when actually there's a huge amount of collaboration that's going on at the grassroots level, but we don't tell that story well.
Can I just follow up on that? I find it a little bit, I would say, arrogant for us as universities going out and telling the public we matter. Really what we need is actually the public to be seeing stories about how we've helped them. And so we need the public to be talking about us. So the university sector telling the public you've got it wrong, we really are important, really doesn't cut it. And particularly in this time of where there's a current cost of living challenge. And so really, of course, there's outrage by the public at the moment over VC salaries. There's outrage over housing affordability, so they'll blame anything. And there's outrage over the fact that their children cannot get loans for their houses without the HECS being counted. And so we're operating in an environment where we shouldn't be telling people. We should be getting, our industry partners who have benefited from what we've worked collaboratively on, We're also viewed as competing against each other all the time, and so we actually have to step up and start focusing on the things that are important to the nation. And so the executive summary of the strategic examination of R&D had a couple of really striking things in it, and that is most of our R&D that we fund is not aligned with our strategic research priorities, so we're not actually doing research in the nation's mission, and so we're not using the government's taxpayers' funding well. And then secondly, that sole trader image that was referred to. Most university academics pursue the research that they want to pursue rather than the ones that the nation needs. So I think we've got to actually rethink our role within the sector, as well as think about we shouldn't be doing telling, we should be getting other people to tell our story.
Adam Shoemaker, how does that fit with your brand, which, you know, as far as I can tell, is for Victoria, for Western Melbourne, by Western Melbourne?
Look, brand is as brand does, in my view. And I couldn't agree more. There's about 7 key points you made there in that. I think like they're all important, right? But the number one thing I heard, and with which I really agree, is that social license is never defined from within by participants. It's defined from without by collaborators, by partners, by those, if they deem you worthy. And there's no automatic nature that will be the case. So I'll try and give you an example. If you decide that a campus and that a university, and I would say most of them would agree with this, are public purpose, taxpayer-endowed institutions as a principle. You know, you might disagree about the ratio of that, but you'd say they are public table A providers, okay? Not talking for the moment just about private universities or others, but just that slice for the minute. Then you might say, and that matters to literally, you know, nearly 1 million people. And then multiply every student by parents, grandparents, siblings, and you've got 3 or 4 million. Now, I'm not saying that's unimportant, I'm saying that's important. But do those 4 million really care about these issues? They do, but what voice do they have? Let me give you an example. If we think that homelessness is a big, big issue, we think that poverty is a big, big issue, so I guess what we did at VU, instead of branding and talking about it, is we actually threw open a whole part of our campus at Footscray Nicholson to a charity called Reach Out to the Inner West, okay? And it was like what used to be the printery of the university. Remember those things that we used to all have? Gone, right? And so we donated refrigeration, we donated all sorts of stuff, no rent, no electricity charge, no water, nothing. A lot of volunteers coming from the university. 3,000 meals a week are being prepared in that area, okay? Not just for students, about half for students, but a half for the community, okay? In the Footscray Mall, okay, for those of you who know it. Now, to me, that's the kind of thing that we could amp up and do much, much more of, that the world would say, thank you very much, that makes sense to us at a time, you mentioned it, crisis of cost of living, you know, not being able to eat. And if you think about it really realistically, international students get a bad rap. I'm just going to say this, I believe as a former international student myself, I was not rich coming to this country, and most of them are not either. And most people have this view in the community erroneously that it's a wealthy cohort. So I can give you the figures in our case. We have 80% of Victoria University International, that is students who have got a visa to travel here, have taken out loans, and sometimes multiple loans, over many years to afford to come. Okay? So the cohort which is coming here is very often like the less advantaged cohort in our own society, and we don't talk about that. But I'm really interested in that equity aspect. So to me, the brand has to reflect the people, not the other way around. That's my view.
What do you do? How do I phrase this? There is a tradition of very rich and very large universities, and I'm certainly not mentioning the University of Sydney, I'm thinking people in Melbourne, which they run campaigns saying, come and study with us, and it'll give you something to do until you become Secretary General of the United Nations, because we will teach you about social justice, and here are the issues we'll campaign on. And they do. They talk about degrees that will help you change the world. That strikes me as being an argument, a sales pitch that works with, frankly, for rich people from private schools. And that is not the majority of undergraduates today. Are some of the elite messages out of whack with the lived reality?
Undoubtedly. But the question is that what people really believe on the staff and the academic staff and the professional staff? I think a lot of them don't design these campaigns, and some may even be a bit embarrassed at times. You know, I'm not picking on any individual campaign, but as I say again, it's actually what's important, what is said word of mouth, online, through streaming services, whatever. Those campaigns are having less and less cut through, I'm afraid to say, a lot of the time, unless their lived reality is parallel. So I'll try and give you another example from our own case, that one of the campuses is called St. Albans, which is in a very, an area which is challenged economically in Melbourne. So there, the partners that are on campus are mental health partners, Lifeline, Melbourne City Mission, and Autism Spectrum Australia. They all have buildings each. Okay? Again, same sort of plan. We call it the flipped campus model. Now, what they talk about to their clientele is much more important in many ways than what we talk about in the traditional sense of branding. Okay? So this is the kind of sense of families and those in need, those who come for psychological support, those who are in occupational therapy support, mental health nursing. It's both students who are getting placements on campus, and it's public getting services provided for them as well. So to me, that's the integration model. The campaign then reflects, if there is a campaign, the story of those people, not our story. I think that's sort of what you're getting at.
Yeah. So our campaign is there as a place for you.
Yeah.
And there are different ways to come into the university. Yeah. And it resonates with me in particular. I'm a first-in family. I came from a low socioeconomic background, and I grew up in a small country town. And I never imagined that I didn't even know what a science degree or honours was. And there's lots of people still out there, lots and lots of people who haven't had the opportunity to see things that they can have as exemplars for career pathways. And so giving people options and ways to participate in higher education, I think, is really important. And it may not be, and in fact I suspect it won't be, 3 or 4 year degrees moving forwards. It will be skills you need at the time and learning that you need at the time.
Which goes to Mary O'Kane's point in the Accord, that we're going to need 1 million tertiary, not necessarily university, educate new people by the middle of the century to keep the economy functioning. How do you pitch your institution, or how does the sector as a whole sell its message that it is the place where you can learn these skills to grow the economy, to provide for your family?
I'd just like to sort of just repitch that a little bit. And we talk about the Accord and the number of jobs that will be needed by 2050. We need to double it. We also need to remember we really need to double our trades. So currently the predictions are looking at there will only be 10% of trade people by 2050. And we need much more than that to build these houses, to do these new industries. And so I think the discussion that's happening at the moment about the alignment between the vet sector and the tertiary university sector is really, really important, because otherwise we're going to lose and have a polarisation of those who are very well off and those who are not so well off, and that middle sector, which is our middle class traditionally, which is trades, will have disappeared. So to me, that's crucial.
You're quite right. I may have misspoke and said it was tertiary positions, trade and university, that we'll need 1 million more of. But nevertheless, everything I'm hearing, what you're saying, marketing directors' heads will blow up, because how are you going to make that a mission-based effort when you're worrying about, not so much in the regions, but you're worrying about competition? That the University of Sydney goes head-to-head for students, and to give the Sydney Morning Herald something to write about. Every year they go head-to-head for the best students, at least by HSC measures. How do you balance those dichotomies?
Do you want to get that too?
Well, I'd just like to go back to the preparing people for the future part and try not to talk about the University of Sydney, but there's been a huge focus across the whole of the sector. We don't know what jobs are going to require in 20, 30 years, but I guess everyone's betting that the more resilient, the more adaptable, the more creative those skills. So there's a huge amount of work going across the sector to deepening the generic transferable skills. At Sydney, we've tried to, obviously, 2 of our largest degrees are still the Bachelor of Arts and the Bachelor of Science. Get a good foundation, go deeper in a couple of disciplines, but then also decide on your professional pathway maybe later on. But there's a tension there, and I think, Joe, it's not a new argument. Business says your graduates aren't ready. But then, I'm here with a colleague from Dolby Research Laboratories who says we're not looking for people that know how to do things right on the very day. We're going to train them in that sort of stuff. We want them to know a certain amount of coding, but they need to know industry specific. So there's a role for industry and employers to also contribute to what they need, but we need to prepare people who can adapt and shift and know that they can go back to get other skills if they need to reskill. And I actually think what we want in our sector is a huge amount of diversity, student choice. People can still go and study, that arts degree or whatever, but we also have to provide pathways for other people as well, and that we should be thinking less so much about competition. And it's great to see the paper out from Jobs and Skills Australia on the weekend. Like, how do we get a more integrated tertiary system? My personal view is a lot of that has to do with the funding model, but that's a really complex piece to unpick, and I haven't read the full paper yet, but I think we've got tension at the TAFE level and parts of the university sector where we're competing against students, and then policy will preference one over the other. We really need to again come back to the student. How do we let that student decide what's the best pathway for them, and be agnostic to whether it's a university or vet? They're all important.
Professor Glover's paper that came out yesterday, the Jobs and Skills Australia model, sadly talked a lot about institutions, Didn't hear many direct references to the people who are going to fill those places.
Yeah. So it's not really, it's sort of implicitly student-centred, but a lot of it's about structure and laddering of qualifications. So I kind of put it this way. I've worked in every one of the groupings in Australia: ATN, IRU, regional universities, GO8 for 14 years, loved them all. I'm sorry, I loved them all, okay? And now I'm in a non-aligned dual sector. Suddenly you feel alone, right? Except for the students, and that's great because there's, 49,000 of them. But what I mean is, people, they don't look for the common features, they look for the differences. And there's a lot more that aligns and joins the sector than divides it. So, competition, sure, but let me give it to you this way. In Victoria, 4 dual sector universities, which are TAFE and higher ed, only state which has legislatively embraced that big time. There's like 1 in Queensland, 1 in Northern Territory. What do I predict? I think there'll be more of those, likely, and much more industry embeddedness. You saw just the coverage of the first announcement today with McDonald's, University of South Australia, and Torrens University talking about skills that can trade through with credit into degrees, okay? Expect more of that as well, as long as it's in the interest of people. Now, most of the students, I'll call them students because mostly are, who work at McDonald's are not rich either. Let's face it, the demography of McDonald's is not like super wealthy at that level. Maybe at the top level, very wealthy, right? And not necessarily Australian owned, that's another topic, right? Wither free trade. But anyway, what I'm getting at is maybe that makes sense in terms of the demography, and we got to look at it. But I would put it this way: the dual sectorness, which is an awkward word, but the skills base, so whenever we're ready for you, you're ready for us, and vice versa, is a powerful proposition, as long as we are ready. And there's an inherent problem, I think, in the TAFE sector about having just not very many starts in the year. And there's an inherent problem in the higher ed sector for having not that many starts in the year, except, Southern Cross and ourselves have gone a different way. So, and the world of people is we have to work, 48 weeks of the year, if not 50 or 52, some of them, depending on who. So why aren't we also matching their life and work? I'm just asking the question.
Which raises what you and Southern Cross have done with the block model, adapting millennia-old traditions of teaching to the needs of people who do work in McDonald's.
Well, look, I'm not here to promote just a place.
I'll go on.
But the idea, I will for a second, but just for a second. Look, the truth is that I didn't invent it, so I can promote it because it was others' great ideas. But if you think about it, and we love this sort of live event, okay? And this is almost better than lectures in the main, because they're interactive and we're all engaged and we sort of self-selected. But the attendance at lectures is really plummeting, it's a problem. And also people with any sort of diverse backgrounds find it sometimes quite alienating, right? And so there's an increasing number of people who find the lecture, tutorial, end of semester final exam thing pretty punitive, and especially post-COVID. The whole mental health strategies show you this. So what's a better way? well, that's student-centered, that's a bit like a graduate class, like a master's class, but for first years. And everyone said, you can't do that. People aren't ready. But in fact, with a small group of 35 max, and really facilitative teachers, educators who have to be trained in that model, you can just achieve remarkable things. And the actual evidence is showing vastly increased student progression, success, employability, and satisfaction. Now, I'm going to tell you, 10 years ago, Victoria University was the worst in the country for QUILT results for student satisfaction. Like, I think 39th, something like that. And this year, depending on how you read the numbers, third, maybe fourth, right up there. And that's entirely because of the method and the model of teaching. It's not, and the people, by the way, people have come to embrace it as well. What I'm saying is that could be any university that chooses to go that way. Any university. It's not just unique to us, but gosh, it was a big job to do. And every accrediting agency said you'll never do it at the time. You can imagine, the law societies were saying, how will this fit with the priestly 11? Engineers Australia was saying, how will this relate to our majors? A lot of work had to be done, and getting all that together was a massive achievement. So I just pay tribute to my predecessors who did it. Now we're trying to kick it on internationally and say, what does the block model look like in Malaysia? What does it look like in Vietnam? What does it look like in Sri Lanka? What does it look like in India? And but believe me, there's a lot of interest.
You're leading. You're leading your community, in your academic community. Yours seem to be following pretty successfully. I imagine that it would take a while to adjust other cultures to do that. But is this not what leadership's supposed to do?
Well, that's for others to say, but I'll tell you something. I'm getting caned over other things. So let me just be honest. I get criticized a lot. I mean, you're very kind. But I went swimming recently, swam in a public pool, finished my swim, came and talked to this family afterwards. We were just talking about, the pool. And suddenly they popped the question, what do you do for a living? Embarrassing. So I said, I work at a university which I love. And they said, which one? And I said, VU. Oh, Vic Uni. It's called Vic Uni, depending on the age grouping, of the person, right? And then they said, what do you do there? I said, well, I'm an academic. What do you teach? And then finally they said, and what do you actually do daily? And I said, oh. It's kind of like if you thought of it as like a school, and I'd be like the principal. And they said, you're a vice chancellor. Why aren't you wearing a gold-encrusted bathing suit? That's what the person said.
I just also say
that feeling, I tried to avoid. I tried to duck it, but I got it right in the smacker. Yeah. And it was kind of like I deserved every bit. And I said, well, look, it wouldn't be very sun protective. You had to think of something, right? But we do have a problem. This is getting back to the social license thing. Yeah. I may be leading a great institution that cares and has heart and integrity and all those things, but I'm still thought of as being a rich whatever. Yeah. And I've got to deal with it. We do.
Adam, what I'm hearing from you, from what you've done with your curriculum reform, there must have been a huge amount of listening. Yeah. So you went out. Are you able to talk about that listening process? Because I think in some ways the sector and individual universities maybe haven't listened enough to what the community...
Well, true. And Z, I don't want to take too much of the airtime here, but I'll be quick.
I'd like to pick up on culture after this, actually.
Look, I'll thank you for the question, but I think listening is the most important skill of all in academia, and I believe that ever since the day one of my PhD. And I was so incredibly fortunate to be able to be invited into a topic and a people in an area where listening is venerated. That is First Nations Australia. And the main thing is to shut up and open your ears and just be quiet and listen. And so the truth of the matter is that, to me, that's a forgotten art. We try and fill all these pauses all the time. And we don't really listen to criticism. We just listen to reframe it. So we have we're trained to be rational debaters. And so if we win the argument, we think we won the issue, when in fact a lot of things are very emotive out there and there's a lot of pain and it's not rational. And to me, that's, I think, where the whole social license thing sits. It's in that emotive pain territory, and rational argument isn't going to win the day unless you can really show you're doing something about it. That's my opinion.
Yeah, so going back to social license, I think it's also a cultural thing, and I really experienced, I guess, because prior to going to Newcastle, I spent 6 years in Singapore, which was an amazing experience, working for the Singaporean government, running 2 of their research institutes. And when I came back, it was sort of a big cultural shock because I'd been living for 6 years in an environment where the community put the nation first and the individual second. Whereas coming back here, it has always been the individual first and, you know, the nation if it really has to be addressed kind of thing. And so I think that, you know, that's a conversation, a dialogue that we need to have as a nation, particularly at the moment we're talking about, you know, why can't we manufacture things anymore? Why did we lose that capacity? And so I think not only do we have to have cultural shifts within our own universities, but we also need to have shifts in our political system. We need to have bipartisanship. You know, that can't be something that's a poisonous pill that can never be swallowed. We also need to have our departments cooperating. So in the research sphere, for example, we need the departments of education, health and industry all working together to set out, you know, ambitious 5-year agendas about what those 5 national priorities are and what questions are we going to put out there to the sector to work with industry community and universities to actually address those big national priorities. Otherwise, they'll never get done, and they haven't been done to date. So that's a change in the way we do things.
Almost impossible for government to do, particularly in a bicameral system, which is a leadership role that one would have thought higher education could, indeed the whole education sector, could step up to.
Yeah. So, for example, I recently was given the privilege to chair the New South Wales ACT Deputy Vice-Chancellor's Research Committee. And we decided we were going to do something cooperative and collaborative and something that was important. And so obviously there's been a large amount of media around domestic violence. So we organised a workshop where we had 11 of the 13 universities represented. And they came to Newcastle, so they did go on, you know, there was a lot of travel for some people. We had the heads of the relevant New South Wales departments there, and we're establishing, you know, for the first time a cooperative doctoral training centre around domestic, family and sexual violence, working on data that the departments have, co-creating the actual PhD projects, and basically having one PhD student from each of those 11 universities going through as a cohort to try and get the research that the departments don't have the time to do, and also looking at ways that people in the department could also join in as supervisors and also as students themselves. And so that was a really, really simple example of what you can do if you decide you're not going to compete, but you're going to collaborate for important issues of the day.
Did it get reported?
Sorry?
Did it get reported in the media? Horrible people like me?
No, because we've got our meeting on the 4th of March where we're going to talk about the operational structure.
Right.
But yes, we will be making sure it's visible.
Because that's a natural.
Yeah.
It's absolute natural.
Yeah. And they're the stories that we need to do. And so, you know, currently we're all trying to work on 3 impact stories, which are economic impact, not just the social impact, because we need that with in terms of our cases to government and to the community. And, you know, and it came about from, there was an article, I can't remember where it was, on LinkedIn or somewhere, that said, you know, the 3 things that Australia's contributed to the world we didn't make any money out of: Wi-Fi, solar and solar panels, I should say, and Gardasil, which, you know, did make money, but it didn't make us much. But everyone forgets about the other things. So at our university, we've got the Jameson cell, which most people probably won't know what it is, but it's a way of actually separating out minerals in the resource industry. You know.
Yeah, there was a bloke who worked on that at Newcastle for 1,000 years. Graham somebody.
Yep.
I remember writing about him.
Yep.
He was extraordinary.
More than $14 billion of economic value. And, you know, all of us have these stories which just aren't quite as sexy as curing cancer or whatever else, that we should be articulating or getting the industry to articulate for us.
I won't ask the pointy-headed question there, which is, well, should the ARC have killed engagement and impact as a metric?
I think that's the first time in this entire debate we've heard that word impact.
Yeah.
But that's what it's really about, is impact. Are we doing something that benefits the community, or are we benefiting ourselves? And so, again, going back to the rankings discussion, they're really perverse drivers of activity. And so, you know, it doesn't really matter if 10 people read your paper. If someone who reads it then goes on to do something amazing, that's great. But we really have to get better at articulating impact and following it.
You've talked a lot, the 3 of you have talked a great deal about service, one form or the other. There's also leadership. And let me frame that by, there was a story about the University of Sydney in the Fin last week, and it was about Microsoft a Microsoft breakthrough in terms of quantum computing by a team in Seattle. And it's a project that a number of academics at the University of Sydney have worked on for years and years and years and years. And they're not part of it now because they've declined an offer to go to Seattle. They'd rather stay in Sydney. Now, first, I'd never heard of it, and I read this stuff constantly and chronically. There's also the role of leadership in transformation. Ed Husic, the Minister of Industry, talks a very big game about we're going to change Australia completely by investing in industry and industry-based research. And he says it's all happening in universities. You're putting the press releases out, no question about that at all, but no one much is reading them. How do you address that?
So, again, I'll go back to other people need to speak for you in credible audiences and in relevant terms, I guess. And again, I'll go back to Newcastle, which I know is a little bit different because it is such a much-needed institution within the region. It's the second largest employer. Recently, we were very fortunate to get some funding from the regional Precincts and Partnership Program, and we got $20.7 million. We found out on the Friday morning that the PM was visiting on the Monday morning, and when we turned up, all of our industry partners were there because they just do that. And in fact, we probably don't exploit that enough. We have a Pro-Vice Chancellor who came from another New South Wales university, and they talked about when they used to have events in the capital city that they came from, Sydney obviously, other New South Wales University, not your Sydney, sorry, it's the capital Sydney. And he said that, when he went to industry events, there'd be all these academics and only a few industry partners, whereas in Newcastle it's the opposite way round. There's just so many industry partners, so much work we could do. We have to actually change the culture of our academics to realise that working with industry is as important as trying to get Category 1 funding.
With respect, easier said than done.
Sometimes you've got to say no to industry as well. I'm just going to put it out there. It's not all good.
No.
And so we say no as much as we say yes, because we've got the view that unless you have an ethical, aligned industry partner physically located on a campus, it's not a campus. That's our model, okay? So it's not just going a little bit halfway, it's going a lot further, but then some of the ones who come to that party, you can't, and you wouldn't, and you shan't, and won't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's kind of like, the problem is industry covers a multitude of things. And sometimes there's fantastic industry players who really have the best, of the public in mind and for the world in mind, and you can just collaborate like crazy. Others are frankly wanting to save money and just shift cost across, right? And I'm just saying we have to be eyes open about this. So industry is fantastic in its own right as a concept, but it's not the be-all and end-all of everything unless you're very discerning.
Yeah, I'd just like to say there's a whole range of industry. It's from established multinationals, which we don't have many of, but there's our small and medium enterprises, our LLCs, and our spin-outs and startups. You need to have different approaches to the different sectors that you're trying to work with. I think the way that Singapore has approached its engagement with industry is incredibly impressive, so much so that they're now ranked number 1 on the Global Innovation Index in the world. And so I think we should be looking to other successful nations rather than trying to recreate it all ourselves. But I do think partnership with industry and having the right incentives for industry is really important. And I agree with the co-location. We have so many companies based on our campus, and I'd like to have more if we had the facilities. But, Germany, there's lots of really great industry-university relationships and partnerships, and I think bringing in TAFE as well will also make it really, really interesting.
But isn't that the heart of the discussion paper for Husic's R&D review? It's pretty much answered the question before it started, and the answer seems to be we're pretty much stuffed because industry and universities just can't stand each other and they don't talk.
I don't think that's right, Stephen. I mean, I think it depends which industries you're talking about. It's how you define it. Like, we have had no lack of people lining up to want to talk and to come and to be and to do. However, sometimes, as I said, somebody wants to just put a call center on your campus and just throw their employees to the wind in terms of entitlements. We didn't want that. That's industry. So it isn't just, see what I mean? We need to be a bit more careful in filtering about what we're talking
There's
about.
a tension, a broader tension between discovery research and applied research. And discovery research is the core of the academic endeavour. And yet that is not where the money is under either party. And Newcastle, with respect, has always got, not a problem, but an issue with the fact you're so strong in engineering and mining, which isn't wildly popular with a lot of your staff.
Yeah, but most of those companies are transitioning over to critical metals and other opportunities. And, you know, as I said before, the university has an absolutely critical role. It's got a burning platform, which always sort of polarises and galvanises you into action. If we don't help the region transition to new industries, whatever they might look like, that's going to be devastating for the region and devastating for New South Wales, because currently it generates 65% of all the power in New South Wales.
And Tim, you must say no to some.
Yeah. Yeah, but I just would like to maybe talk about industry partnerships. I mean, at Sydney Uni, about 60% of the research activity is in the health and medical space. I think we have 9,000 students in those disciplines, but their teaching is embedded within the health sector, mostly in the public hospitals, but also in private hospitals. That's huge, and there's so much co-teaching that happens. That's not unique to Sydney. That any university that is involved in health medical education. I just wonder, in terms of practical outcomes, whether there's better stories we can be telling about that sort of partnership and the value of that. And just as a personal story, my father recently had a 12-hour operation for skin cancer on his face, and 6 hours was plastic surgery, 6 hours was to get the cancer out. But the anaesthetist, university trained, the cancer surgeon, university trained, the plastic surgeon, university trained, the nurses, the speech pathologist, all university trained. And when you have your mother there, and the trust. So in terms of that story about trust now, the community looks, when you're in crisis in your family, and you look to professionals, they are trained and people have confidence, but are we telling that story well enough? And then how do we take that across, in the schools? I mean, look, a colleague here in the office was pitching me an idea in my office over the weekend. We're just about to head into an election. We've got a crisis in civics and citizenship in our schools. We've got a wealth of understanding about democracy in our universities. Why can't we, as a group, as an idea, think about what the role is that universities, and universities, let's face it, are under threat in democracy. We could be telling the story of democracy and protecting the role of those institutions by mobilising, not at a national level, but to say each university, let's focus at the local level on what you can do about democracy in this election, to explain the process, to explain the debate, not to be taking positions on the debate, but to be convening that discussion and getting those experts out. And that's all stuff that can be supported. So look, one of the things I was hoping for from this discussion, we know the chancellors, the vice-chancellors, they're all having the same discussion. But I was hoping that as staff we could come together to try to get some ideas so that we can provide better advice.
Let's ask the gentleman there.
Michael Fay from ASEAN Focus Group. Just getting back to Brand Australia and also the loss of social licence, could you tell us what you think are the key issues that have helped to lose that social licence, if in fact it has been lost, and how much of it has to do with international education sector rather than the laudable things you're doing domestically?
Shall I have a little go, I guess, and then if you want. Michael, look, it's a very good question, and on the record, I believe that the policies from all parts of government, I don't mean just one party, political side, have been damaging. I adverted before to the very, very hard work that international students do to even think of coming to this nation. It's a dream for so many years to come. And switch policies on and off with, I wouldn't say disdain, but bordering upon it is how it looks and feels, is very, very harsh. And no wonder it redounds back, ironically, on us. It looks like we've turned the taps on and off, even though we haven't had the choice so to do. But I guess what I would say is, there's, as far as like rebuilding that and trying to address it, I don't think it's lost, but I think that partnering with those nations intensively in a culturally nuanced way, in their own language, in their own way, is so important. And it may require us to do more transnational education in countries in situ, rather than just talking about people traveling with visas, you know, that kind of thing, because there's been damage done, no question, been damage done. And the irony is, and I'll just be quick, that it was alleged to be linked to the housing crisis, as if that was the fault of international students. I won't go down that road other than to say, give me a break, you know? Like much more on, you know, land banking for, you know, people with multiple, anyway, you could go on, right? But it was like sat out there as a kind of bogey almost, like, and international students felt like they were being, you know, victimized or targeted for something not of their creation and not even true, okay? So we were all trying to say things like, how about a policy which turbocharged homestay, you know, in the nation, addressing affordability because so many people are retiring still with mortgages, many more than before, and many of them don't realize they could have a fantastic experience with a student from another place who could actually benefit in many ways, and so would they, you know? Really getting a creative policy instead of it was all punitive policy. So the answer to your question is, yes, it's linked to social license. Unfortunately, it was deemed to be the university's fault, but I think we have to just wear it because that's just the aura. But for heaven's sake, we've got to fix it.
I just wanted to say, being a regional university where the international students are such an issue, I think the really important thing around social licence is, at the moment, no political side's going to go out and champion for us. They've got to focus on cost of living issues for the community, and we have to make sure we're not elitist, but we're hearing what's going on out there, and that we're working with the community to address the major issues that they want to address. Hence my example of the domestic, social and family violence.
Lady, 5 back.
Thank you. June McDonald, the University of Queensland and the University of Sydney. Relatively little has been said about the relationship between the university sector and the schooling sector. And I'm just interested, have you got any thoughts around future relationships in terms of recruitment, but more so impact and equity?
So I can tell you that we have a program where we go out into the Hunter region to, can't remember the number of schools, but simply thousands of students get exposure in years 10 through to 12. We also run the student university where they actually come into campus and go through a graduation type ceremony and get to wear robes and those types of things. But obviously our major where our students come from is actually in the Hunter, New England area and the Central Coast. And so really it's about the pathways that we get. We work with the schools to identify students who may never have thought of university or even higher education in general being an option, and try to bring as many through as we possibly can. So we work very, very closely with schools. And that includes Indigenous students in the Indigenous communities, and like I say, a huge footprint.
You have schools on campuses, many universities do, science schools at Monash, this kind of thing, it exists all over the place. And I'm a very big fan of that model because it breaks down a ton of boundaries. You know, all the school students then on a campus get to use the library for free, you know, all that kind of thing. Just imagine the benefits to society as a whole. I call it, you know, we call it triple sector approaches, right? Again, that's really a way of the future I believe that many places will embrace. But that's just my short answer.
I'd just also say that it's another example of really deep and good partnerships, and it's partnerships between school and departments of education, but also schools and school principals, but also the unions and the teachers.
Yeah.
In New South Wales, there's agreements between the Department of Education and also with the unions and with the universities. So it's similar to the ecosystem with the health and medical education and research. And again, another area where maybe we don't tell the stories well enough. And it's not just teaching students, it's your occupational therapists, your speech pathology students. It's all of those students that are contributing. And the other thing I'd say from our industry partnerships is the feedback constantly is that what they really love about the students is the innovative ideas and also the contact with the research that the students are exposed to. So they're bringing that latest thinking into the classroom. But look, there's huge challenges in the school system with getting enough teachers, particularly in science, in the STEM subjects, and the further you go out into regional areas. So that's a huge challenge. But fortunately, in New South Wales at least, there's been an uptick in this year. I think the policies that the state, federal governments are putting in place have contributed to there's a bigger demand for those places from students.
And running entrepreneurship programs in the high schools too is really quite exciting because that gives an opportunity for students to actually create their own businesses. And
I think we're out of time. I mean, it's a shame we're out of time, but we are. I think if there's one take out of that, it's less campaigning in the sense of things that I do and more culture in the sense of things that people like you do. Z. Upton from the University of Newcastle, Tim Payne from the University of Sydney, Adam Shoemaker from Victoria University in Melbourne. Thank you so much for your time, ladies and gentlemen. Bill Shorten's up next. Yep.